Earlier this summer, I had the opportunity to travel overseas quite a bit. And I noticed as I was walking through several of the duty-free stores that there's been a major change to cigarette containers. Unlike here in the States where you find that Surgeon General's warning, this may be harmful to your health, over there they actually have images, pictures. For instance, one of the images showed a cadaver with its chest completely exposed, actually showing you what lung cancer looks like. It's not a surprise to anybody that smoking 3 or 4 packs a day, we know will dramatically cut down the lifespan of individuals. In fact, we know that smoking will reduce your lifespan by roughly 4 to 10 years over that of a non-smoker. This is so harmful that the government has actually jumped into the picture, and they're putting notices for customers. Notices showing you that this is harmful to your health. Likewise, alcohol, some drugs, same general approach is given where we are warned of what this can do to us. I want you to ask yourself as we begin, what if schools suddenly began promoting a behavior that was dangerous to you or to your child? What would your reaction be? We all know the topic of same-sex marriage has become incredibly emotionally charged. What I want to do for just a few minutes of your time is I want us to actually look at this particular controversy, strip away some of the emotion, and let's actually look at it from more of a scientific perspective. Is this genetic-based, or is it a choice? If you will, I'd like for you to join me as we kind of silence all of the rhetoric, silence the emotion, and let's actually look at what the facts are behind homosexuality. Is it just a choice, or is there really a gay gene? The very first study out of all those that were publicized highly in the early 90s was a study done by Simon LeVay. Simon LeVay reported that he had found structural differences in the brains of homosexuals, specifically in an area, the anterior hypothalamus. What he did was he took the brains of roughly 32 cadavers, 32 dead people, and he began to look and ask himself, okay, what exactly do I see that is alike and what's different? What areas are similar? What areas are dissimilar? Now, one of the things that we might ask ourselves as we're looking at this particular study is, why did he do it? What was his reasoning? For you see, Simon LeVay had both personal and political reasons in doing this study. He gave a Newsweek interview in which he said, if I didn't find anything, I would give up a scientific career altogether. So exactly what did he find? If we were to ask the question, what did his research show? Well, one of the things that it showed was there was a difference in this anterior hypothalamic region. But was it due to homosexuality? It was an interview done by Advocate.com, June the 1st, 1993. And in that interview, he was asked the question, do you really think that grounding homosexuality in biology can help win political equality? Listen to what he said. He said, all the civil rights legislation based in the 60s is based on the knowledge that there is a genetic and immutable difference between blacks and whites. Of course, blacks are still discriminated against, but the legal advances they've made are based on those genetic differences. And I think that is a major stumbling block for our gaining the same protection as other groups. He went on to say, there's a survey in the New York Times that broke down people on the basis of whether they thought gays and lesbians were born that way and whether it was a lifestyle choice. He said across the board, those who thought gays and lesbians were born that way, he said, were more liberal and more gay friendly. So obviously there's something at stake here. But if we were to evaluate the evidence from a scientific perspective for just a moment, and we ask ourselves, okay, what exactly did Mr. LeVay find? Of those 32 brains that he looked at, he identified 19 of those brains as being from AIDS patients. Okay, we got to stop right there. Scientifically speaking, we know that AIDS, the virus, actually will ravage the brain. It will change the structure. So we ask the question, is what he was seeing, is that related to homosexuality, or was it related to the virus? 19 he identified to be from AIDS patient. The other 13, notice this, he wasn't sure of their sexual history. He actually had to make an assumption. And so right off the bat we see a little bit of troubling scientific information with this study. If you're not 100% sure of those other 13, how can you make clear, distinct discussions? How can you make clear, distinct observations? The second thing that we need to look at, LeVay, in looking at the brains of these people, he argued that a small region of the hypothalamus actually caused men to be gay. That region he identified as INAH3. He said if that particular area was small, then it caused men to be gay. Interestingly, though, according to his guesswork, some of the people who allegedly had had sex with men had an INAH3 area that was larger than the average size of supposed men who had had sex with women. So in evaluating his own evidence, one of the things we see is his evidence actually contradicts itself. But number three, and probably most importantly, nobody has been able to replicate his findings. Now, folks, in science, that is a keystone, that's a landmark, and yet here's Simon LeVay saying, hey, I found something, and yet nobody else is able to find that. The fourth piece of evidence that I would suggest we look at is this. During an interview in 1994, so we're a couple of years after his study had been published, he admitted the following. He said, quote, "It is important to stress what I didn't find. I did not prove that homosexuality is genetic or find a genetic cause for being gay. I didn't show that gay men are born that way, the most common mistake people make in interpreting my work, nor did I locate a gay center in the brain." The last piece of evidence that I would offer to you, if we're looking at this from kind of a 30,000-foot elevation view, if we're trying to really get a clear picture of the overall picture, that is, number 5, Simon LeVay himself is an admitted homosexual. He's got a vested interest in providing this genetic link. This first study, one of the ones that really kicked off the height of the idea in the early 90s that there is a genetic cause, when you really start to look at it, you realize it doesn't have any basis. The second study that was announced right around that same time, also in 1991, is the famous Bailey and Pillard twin study. It was actually published in the Archives of General Psychiatry, 1991, the December issue of that particular journal. In that particular study, Bailey and Pillard found the following. They reported that 52% of monozygotic, or that is identical twins, and 22% of dizygotic, that is fraternal twins, were concordant for homosexuality. In other words, they were saying we're finding a much larger, a significant increase among twins. Now, that was their original finding. And yet, when we look at that for just a moment, we consider what did they really discover? What was the evidence? We got to turn and we got to ask ourselves, first and foremost, have their results been replicated? In the year 2002, Bierman and Bruckner did a similar study, except they chose a larger sample size. One of the major problems everybody kept pointing out among Bailey and Pillard's twin study was they had a very small sample size. Bierman and Bruckner, they increased it. And yet, here was their numbers. They noticed only a 7.7% increase among identical twins and a 5.3% increase or concordance among fraternal twins. Not significant. Not only that, they went on to say that this pattern, quote, does not suggest genetic influence independent of social context. The second criticism that we would look at in this particular study is how they got their volunteers. It's been discovered that with homosexuals having gay siblings, they are a lot more likely to volunteer for studies, thus skewing the results. So here are Bailey and Pillard. They are looking for twins in order to try to see a pattern. And yet we know today that homosexuals with gay siblings are a whole lot more likely to volunteer, thus elevating the percentages. Last but not least, what I think is probably the nail in the coffin, if we go back to those identical twins for just a minute. Identical twins, they actually come together. You've got a sperm and an egg fertilized, you've got that embryo, and it splits, and now we've got two distinct individuals with exactly the same genetic information. Now, let's look at this for just a moment. If there really is a genetic cause, if there is a gay gene and this one has it, then this one has to. Folks, there's no way around it. If there really is a genetic gene, a cause, then if one identical twin has it, the other one must. And yet, we didn't find that with the Bailey-Pillard study. The third study that really came about and reignited this idea back in the early 90s was Dean Hammer's study, 1993. Very well-known, well-cited study. Dean Hammer claimed to have found that gay men had more gay male uncles and cousins on the mother's side rather than on the father's side. So he looked at that and he thought to himself, okay, if this is coming predominantly through the mother's side, then maybe this gay gene is on the X chromosome. You remember, males have XY, females have XX. Dean Hammer in 1993, he claimed not only that there was a genetic component, he actually claimed to have found the gay gene. He said that it was located at position XQ28. Now again, we stop for just a moment and we put aside all of the media propaganda, we put aside all of the things on the internet, and we ask ourselves, if we were to evaluate the evidence scientifically, what do we find? First problem is that Dean Hammer didn't use any controls. And by that I mean this. He claimed to have found the gay gene looking at homosexuals. Now, you would think the obvious thing to do is if you found the gay gene in homosexuals to look for the absence of it in heterosexuals. And yet he didn't. Now, folks, consider that for just a moment. Why in the world, if you really believed you had the gay gene, why wouldn't you look for the absence of it in heterosexual population? The second thing that we've got to consider, again, nobody has been able to replicate his findings. In fact, there was an article done in 1995 in the New York Native that said it troubles some scientists that Hammer has not published his original data. They went on to say, additionally, at least one lab that has tried hard to replicate his findings has been unsuccessful. Now, consider that for just a moment and add to that the very real fact that George Rice and his colleagues in 1999, they tried to replicate his findings. In fact, they took 52 gay male siblings from Canada, and yet they weren't able to do it. They said in their paper, quote, allele and haplotype sharing for these markers was not increased over expectation. These results do not support an X-linked gene underlying male homosexuality. That particular study was published in the journal Science. Now, interestingly, Dean Hammer, 1995, he was actually being charged with research improprieties. He fudged his data. He was actually charged and was under investigation by the National Institute of the Health Federal's Office of Research Integrity. You see, one of the things that they discovered after looking through this is that one of his junior researchers actually came out and told them that he had been manipulating the data. Do you think that it's just by chance or by accident that two of these three, Simon LeVay, Dean Hammer, they are both admitted homosexuals? Now, friends, hear me very carefully what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that affects the way they're able to do science, but I am questioning if that does not lead them to a bias of either interpreting their results or maybe even bending their results to fit what they're wanting it to fit. You see, here you've got a Hammer who's claiming he's found the gay gene, and yet the reality, not only did he not, it now looks like he lied. The fourth piece of evidence against him actually comes from Hammer himself. He admitted that his research did not support a genetic cause and that, quote, it was culturally transmitted, not inherited. That according to an article that appeared in the Washington Blade. Later on in the Salt Lake Tribune, 1995, he went on to admit there is not a single master gene that makes people gay. I don't think we'll ever be able to predict who is gay. And yet, they keep trying. Oh, every couple of years or so, we hear about a new study. The 1990s, the early 90s, really put the thought in everyone's mind that, yes, there is a gay gene. And interestingly, if you were to go to many churches today, many congregations around the United States, you know what you're going to find? You'll find people who claim to believe in God, and yet they also believe that they were born that way. You see, they haven't actually examined the evidence. The year 2003, another study pops up. UCLA researchers. They published a paper in Molecular Brain Research. According to Reuters, here's what they discovered. They said sexual identity is wired into the genes, which discounts the concept that homosexuality and transgender sexuality are a choice, California researchers noted. So we've got Reuters here telling us that this particular research basically proves that there's a gay gene. And yet, interestingly, when you actually look at the article itself, when you take the time to go and see what these researchers really found, one of the things we discover is they found gonadal steroid hormones acting directly to promote sexual differences. Notice what I didn't say. I didn't say anything about the word homosexuality. In their original abstract, they said gonadal steroid hormones act directly to promote sex differences. Folks, that's something that's been widely accepted given gender, given hormones. Basically, if you're secreting this hormone, it makes sense that the body is going to develop this way. But it doesn't say anything at all about sexual orientation, about how we behave. Interestingly, in May of 2000, the American Psychiatric Association, they produced a fact sheet. You can actually find it online today. In this fact sheet talking about sexual orientation, they said, and I quote, Currently, there is a renewed interest in searching for biological etiologies for homosexuality. However, to date, there are no replicated scientific studies supporting any specific biological etiology for homosexuality. Wait, let me make sure I understand. The American Psychiatric Association is saying we don't have any kind of a genetic cause, a biological cause for this? No. You see, the reality is it is either genes or choice. And the concept of choice is very unappealing to those who are practicing this behavior. And so, every few months, every few years, we hear about a new possibility. For instance, in the year 2000, they claimed that maybe finger length showed some kind of a genetic disposition towards homosexuality. In October of 2003, it was eye blinking. Researchers thought that maybe the amount of times that you blinked your eye kind of gave some idea. Oh, the studies continue. But the reality is, in the year 2003, scientists finished mapping the human genome. And folks, out of all of this research, if we were to be intellectually honest, if we were to look just from a scientific perspective, one of the things we realize is there is no gay gene. Folks, listen to me carefully. Logic demands that if this were genetic, it would have either already disappeared or it should be on its way out. And the reason that I can say that with such confidence is because homosexual relations do not produce offspring. And so if we are standing by what science has really shown, that this is not genetic, we shouldn't be surprised that the mainstream media says, hey, there's a bigger population of homosexuals. But if it's genetic, if what they're claiming is true, that I was born this way, then folks, it should cause every human being to question, why hasn't that already died out? Or why isn't the homosexual population getting smaller? Now, before we move on, we got to answer the obvious question. A lot of people will say, but wait a second, I know of men who appear very effeminate, or maybe ladies who look very masculine. Can a person be born who is more effeminate, a man? Or can a woman, for instance, be born with more testosterone in her body and appear more manly? The answer is absolutely. However, it is a long stretch to go from these physiological differences to believing that homosexual behavior is necessary. Folks, think about that for just a moment. Just because a man is born with less testosterone and he appears effeminate does not cause him to behave in a certain way. It doesn't make homosexual behavior necessary. And it certainly doesn't make it a civil right. Why the battle? Why is there so much emphasis right now to try to find a genetic cause? It goes back to the idea of civil rights. The Civil Rights Act recognizes minority groups or minority status only for groups that have three things in common. Notice this. Number one, they have to have suffered a long history of discrimination. We know, for instance, that here in the United States of America, people with darker skin would fit that category. Number two, they are powerless to help themselves as a community. In other words, they are going to need help from a higher authority. And number three, they have to be born that way. In order for this to be a civil rights issue, there has to be a genetic link. And yet, friends, we just went through all of these alleged scientific research studies and have shown beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is not genetic. If it's not genetic, then it becomes choice. Let me ask you, just outright, is sodomy a civil right? Several years ago, 1988, there was a war conference. A war conference in which leading activists for the homosexual agenda, they met. And following that war conference, they produced a book called After the Ball. After the Ball, the subtitle of it is How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 90s. In that particular book, they laid out a 6-point agenda that they wanted to accomplish in the 90s. First and foremost, they wanted to talk about gays and gayness as loudly and as often as possible. Number 2, they wanted to portray gays as victims, not as challengers, not as aggressive people. Number 3, they wanted to give homosexual protectors a just cause. Number 4, they wanted to make homosexuals look good in the eyes of the public. Number 5, they wanted to make the victimizers look bad in the eyes of the public. And last but not least, they wanted to be able to get funding. They wanted to get money, resources from corporate America. Now, as you look at that, ask yourself, have they accomplished their agenda? On page 163 of that particular book, the authors state, the campaign we outline in this book, though complex, depends centrally upon a program of unabashed propaganda, firmly grounded in long-established principles of psychology and advertising. Have they been advertising? Like, for instance, have they been promoting pledge cards to students? Have they gotten books and materials for young children? Have they sent books to public elementary schools in order to start getting across this idea of tolerance? The answer is absolutely. This war conference set very specific goals. Let me share some of those with you very quickly. Number 1, they wanted to teach tolerance in school. Number 2, they wanted to get sexual education material into schools K through 12 in order to introduce diversity to students. Number 3, they wanted to take over the news media. Number 4, they wanted to get a voice in politics. Number 5, they wanted to pass hate speech legislation. And number 6, they wanted to get diversity training in businesses. And folks, we've just spent the last half hour looking at the fact that this is not based on genes. There's not a gay gene, there's not a genetic cause. And thus it doesn't fall under the category of a civil right. If it's not a civil right, that means it is a choice. What we've got to decide amongst ourselves as a nation is this the right choice or the wrong choice?